Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you want to interact with the show throughout any given episode, keep on using the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features. Great way to interact with the show. You can press the $ on your screen to leave a tip or donation, or just leave a question, comment, or concern on anything I talk about on this show, as Andre himself enters the chat. Always one of my favorite commenters of the day, of any week, and of all time, as this show has been live. But without further ado, let's jump into our second segment of the day, taking a little bit of a break from NFL talk to talk about college football. Doing the same exact thing, talking about the biggest games, and there are a lot this weekend in college football with the hugest fantasy college football implications. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. And we all know which game I'm going to talk about first. Texas, Georgia. Oops, wrong graphic, but Texas, Georgia. And this isn't just about the QB battle, right? It's not just Beck versus Ewers. It's about the skill position players that both of them have. Now, a lot of people are saying that Quinn coming into this game is looking a bit rusty after his first start at coming back from the oblique injury, and, facing a defense like Oklahoma's and all the complications that could come. But he did settle down, and he did have a rather decent game. Nothing too extraordinary. But on the other side of the equation, Carson Beck is someone who puts up gaudy numbers, but still has some concerning moments as well. As Andre said, I look for a big game from ETN against Texas. And I'm going to get to their skill position. As Andre said, is this game in Texas or Georgia? It is in Texas, in Austin. So it should be an incredible atmosphere here. But here's the thing about what I said about the skill position players. And you're right in bringing up a guy like ETN. If the storyline doesn't center around the quarterbacks, we'll have to center around two different position groups here. For Georgia, I think the running backs are going to be called into question here just because they haven't been as good as we thought, and Texas' run defense is perhaps the best in the nation. So I will say the running backs are 1A, but the perimeter players, the perimeter wide receivers specifically, for Georgia need to create separation, because the Texas secondary is perhaps the only real sign of apprehension Texas fans will have about this team thus far. I don't think they will be as tested for what Georgia can bring downfield because they haven't seen anything quite like it yet this season. So look for Georgia's perimeter receivers. I'm looking at guys like Bell, maybe Lovett as well, to contribute a lot in this game. But Andre, you are right in saying that Trevor Etienne will also have a big game, because if he can't get going against Texas' run D, then Carson Beck might be in for a rough game if they don't get anything going on the ground. On the Texas side of things, I think the same. I think the running backs will also have a big say. Look out for Quintravion Wisner. He had a slow start to start the season, but over the past couple of games, I believe he's had 206 yards rushing, including a career-high 118 last week. So look for him to be someone who is an X factor in this game, can calm Quinn down if some of that rustiness is showing early. But I also like the perimeter weapons that Texas has. I think if Bond is healthy enough to look 100% himself, he's a big factor. Gunnar Helm is going to be a big factor, especially in the red zone, I think, for Texas. And also, I really like what Ryan Wingo can do in terms of touching the field. Quinn hasn't shown the propensity this season to hit many deep balls, but if he gets an opportunity, like he did the last time he was in a game of this magnitude against Bama, he's going to take his shots. So look for Wisner, Wingo, and Helm to be the X factors in this game, also from a fantasy perspective. But it's going to be a good one. I'm really excited as a Longhorns fan for this one. The second game I want to talk about here is Nebraska-Indiana, actually. And this is a very weird one as well, because it's heavily contingent As Andre said, Quinn hit the Costco guys dance. I did, in fact, see that, and that brought a smile to my face because I love Quinn's touchdown celebrations because he always cracks me up for what he does. But going into Nebraska, Indiana, speaking of celebrations and speaking of players who, as a Quinn fan, some people might get annoyed by him, but I like him. But Dylan Raiola is definitely annoying a lot of people in terms of his Patrick Mahomes. As Andre said, Indiana are going to smoke them. I'm calling it. I could see it. I could definitely see Indiana winning this game and handily. And credit to Kurt Cignati for bringing in all these transfer portal guys like Quarter says. The Raiola hype has died down a lot. Chris, what's happened to them? I mean, I just think that, this whole act that he brings is just distracting for what Nebraska wants to do, because the winner of this game, let's face it, is going to be a Big Ten player. But at the end of the day, Raiola is someone who is just perhaps a little too distracted to really put out a nice product on the field week in, week out. And so against a team that itself is looking to have shocking Big Ten title aspirations, you can't slip up. And that's why I feel like Indiana has all the momentum here. I love Curtis Rourke. He could be a dark horse Heisman candidate. I love their weapons. I love their defense. It's very physical. So in this game, it is going to come down to the quarterbacks a little bit more, but I do think Indiana's depth matters here because Dylan Raiola can be his Mahomes-esque self, but at the end of the day, if it's a distracting thing to the product you put out on the football field, your chances are you're going to get blown out by teams that actually want to compete for titles. And Indiana certainly feels like one that could shockingly do so. So that's why I feel like the QB battle in this game is highly integral to the outcome. But you could be exactly right when you're saying Indiana could smoke them, because this game could get ugly quickly if Raiola is not in his game. So you could be very right there. The third game, actually, I want to talk about, Alabama, Tennessee. Kind of taking the back seat to Texas, Georgia this week. On any given week, this would be the main attraction. It still kind of is, because this is a rivalry where Alabama has dominated the past couple of years. But Tennessee, of course, had a big win, I believe, 2 years ago at Neyland Stadium. This time back in Knoxville. And it kind of has a different flavor a little bit, because Tennessee, I feel like at the start of the season, there was a lot of hype around them because Nico looked good. And he looked like he was going to be someone who could lead Tennessee as a true freshman, an admirable job to the college football playoff. But then, about 2 weeks or so ago, Heupel decided perhaps that he doesn't trust him as much as he trusts his defense. And trust me, Tennessee's defense rivals that of Texas's as one of the best in the nation. And yes, I can see why Heupel might want to lean into the physicality that a good defense can bring to a team and the grittiness of how you want to play the game. But at the end of the day, if the offense can't put up points, what's the point of having a good defense? Because you need to trust both sides of the football if you want to be a CFP contender. And right now it doesn't feel like Tennessee. Whereas Alabama is kind of the opposite, right? I feel like they trust their offense a little bit too much, right? In terms of, quote unquote, figuring things out. But then we see these lapses where Alabama's defense lets it down. And let's be honest with you. That game against Georgia could have had a different tune if, the offense didn't come out to an early lead. And that's the weirdness of the Alabama Crimson Tide this season. Are we going to see the Alabama offense have a consistent game, right? Like, say, the one they had against Georgia, where they matched them point for point? Or will the Alabama offense be more like we saw with Vanderbilt and South Carolina this past week, where it's kind of two stop-start to really get going? And so I really don't know how much weight I can place on the value of certain players for Alabama and for Tennessee, for that matter, if I don't know the direction either of these teams is going. because both of them have distinct strengths. Both of them have exceptionally glaring weaknesses that can be exposed by anyone on any given Saturday. And so I want to see some consistency. As I said, the Tennessee offense looks so stagnant these past few weeks. They need to step up here. And I completely agree. Something has to give for one of these units, whether it be Bama's defense or Tennessee's offense. As Andre said, the defense will get them stops though 100%, and I agree with that. But it's going to come down to the Tennessee offense and the Alabama defense. Which unit is going to have a good enough game to get a very important win, to keep the winner in the CFP race, most importantly. And that's the true narrative here that I'm trying to get at. And then the last game that I kind of want to touch on, a little bit of a weird one. Oklahoma State versus BYU. At the start of the year, you probably would have been sitting here going, Chris, what is the meaning of this game? Why is it such an important game, especially from a fantasy perspective? I'll tell you why. Because interestingly enough, BYU is a more appealing fantasy team if you are a fantasy college football player right now than Oklahoma State. And that sentence probably would have never even been considered being spoken into existence before the season start. Because Oklahoma State, you had Ollie Gordon, you had a really nice skill position group led by Brendan Presley. You had a 7th-year senior quarterback in Alan Bowman who, no matter how erratic he is, still can put up good games. And not for nothing, they still had good stretches, but Ollie Gordon has fallen off the face of the earth. He perhaps was the most exciting fantasy college football prospect. Maybe if you were, say, an NFL fantasy football player, you're looking at a dynasty league setting. He had a lot of promise there as well. So his future drastically changed in terms of a fantasy perspective and in real life. Whereas BYU had a couple of decent players, but no one really that could have projected to lead a 6-0 start and be a contender in the Big 12. I mean, I like Jake Retzlaff a little bit, but not enough to convince me that he would have BYU in the driver's seat of the Big 12 title race right now. And not for nothing, his weapons, whether it be Lassiter, whether it be Marion, whether it be Chase Roberts, all of them have contributed well enough to carry this BYU team to contender status, at least in the Big 12, because in the CFP, let's be real, I don't think they'll have a fighting chance. But the point is, the narrative has shifted for both of these teams in real life and from a fantasy perspective. And the question is, well, how much fantasy value are you going to place in this game, if any? Because both of these teams are great fantasy teams, but one of them is disappointing at this point in time, and the other is a complete and utter surprise. So that's why I just wanted to bring this to attention. Another game that I wanted to pinpoint, Miami-Louisville. Cam Ward might just be the best option for fantasy college football managers everywhere at the QB position. He's just a magic man. Whereas Louisville can spring a surprise. Tyler Schaaf's been around in college football for quite some time. But at the end of the day, I think that Cam Ward and that receiving crew is too tough to deny in a fantasy perspective. Let me know what you think in the comments. Coming up next, though, we are transitioning back to the NFL, specifically to the Sunday night game. Very weird one now with all the storylines we've heard about these two teams. So you don't want to miss it. It's going to be a good one right after this short break.